Good morning. Let me call the hearing to order. The committee meets today to consider the nomination of Mr. Ronald Cohane to be Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, and Honorable Nicholas Girton to be Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. And I thank the nominees for their willingness to serve in these important roles. I would also like to welcome the family members who are here today. Mr. Cohane, I would like to recognize your mother, Teresa, who I know wanted to be here today and is watching proudly from home. Mr. Girton, I welcome your wife, Maria, son Enrico, daughter Isabella, brother Joseph, and cousin Gregory. We are grateful to our nominees' families and loved ones for their continued support. Mr. Cohane, you are nominated to be the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs as the principal advisor on all matters relating to civilian and military personnel policies. You will be responsible for military, community, and family policy and reserve integration, as well as day-to-day supervision of the Department of Defense education activity and the Defense Commissary Agency. Your extensive leadership experience in the Department of Defense, various federal agencies, and private sector should serve you very well in this role. First and foremost, you will need to address the military's difficult recruiting environment. The services have struggled to meet their recruiting objectives for several years, and the total force fell tens of thousands of recruits short of its goal last year. Further, we know from recent survey data that young Americans' propensity to serve in the military is at its lowest point in decades. There are many factors contributing to this challenging environment, including competition with the private sector for candidates when the employment rate is at a record low. Even in the best of times, the military has always struggled to recruit when the labor market is slim. As such, the services have adjusted their testing and qualification strategies to try to overcome these challenges. The Army's Future Prep course has shown reasonable success and may provide useful insights for the other services. Mr. Cohane, our military's greatest asset is its people, and it will be critical for you to dedicate rigorous, sustained efforts toward improving recruitment. I would like to know your ideas for increasing the number of young Americans eligible for and interested in military service. I would also note that military child care remains a challenge, with persistent wait lists for child development centers and in some high-density locations, wait lists for fee assistance programs intended to partially offset costs for private care. The services have made modest progress in shortening these wait lists and hiring cleared providers, but more must be done. I would ask for your views on how this child care shortage can be improved. But before I move on, let me make one point. Diversity and inclusion strengthens our military. By every measure, America's military is more lethal and ready than it has ever been. It is also more diverse and inclusive than ever before. This is not a coincidence. Our military looks more and more like the nation it represents, whether in race, gender, creed, sexuality, or any other measure. This is the right direction, as America's strength is in its diversity. But greater diversity requires greater understanding within the ranks, and understanding requires learning and regular training. The fundamental bond that assures unit cohesion is the commitment by every member to protect, not exploit, his or her fellow service members, whoever they may be. This is a state of mind and heart that must be constantly inculcated by training and by example. With that being said, I'm alarmed by the nature of some criticism of the military. Healthy oversight of our military is necessary and productive, but undefined accusations are not. If criticisms are to be made, they should be made with facts, not slogans. There are real consequences to these sorts of accusations, both to the cohesion of our force and civil society, but also to the benefit of our adversaries. This committee is charged with the solemn privilege of overseeing our nation's military. To accomplish this, we must exercise responsible oversight. Mr. Girton, you are nominated to be Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. If confirmed, you would serve as the Navy Acquisition Executive responsible for the development and acquisition of all Navy and Marine Corps platforms and weapon systems, and for enforcement of the Defense Department's acquisition and sustainment procedures. You currently serve as the Department of Defense Director for Operational Tests and Evaluation, having been confirmed to that position by this committee last year. A recent change to the position for which you are nominated is the responsibility to exercise milestone decision authority on behalf of the Navy. The milestone decision authority, the chief official tasked with determining the entry point of an acquisition program in the acquisition process, was previously held by the Office of the Secretary of Defense, but was transferred to the services in the fiscal year 2021 National Defense Act. I would ask for your views on the appropriate balance between acquisition programs at the service level and OSD oversight of such programs. Also in 2021, the Navy released its Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Program, or SIOP, to address longstanding infrastructure issues at the Navy's 4 public shipyards. The modernization plan is designed to help address growing maintenance backlog, especially within the submarine fleet. There is no similar plan for modernizing private shipyards, however, even as these private yards conduct maintenance on almost all of the Navy's surface combatants. Both public and private yards are struggling to meet their schedules, and I would like to know how you will ensure the Navy effectively executes the SIOP, given the scale of investment needed. Thank you again to our nominees. I look forward to your testimonies. Now, let me recognize Ranking Member Senator Wicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today and congratulate them on their nominations and appreciate their willingness to serve. Mr. Cohane has been nominated by the President to be Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. If confirmed, he will therefore be directly responsible for nearly all the policies governing careers in the military and civilian workforce. During this hearing, I would like to learn how he plans to address the most pressing challenge facing the military, which is the current recruiting crisis. If trends continue, this year the Army, Navy, and Air Force will all fail to achieve their respective recruiting missions. The Army and Navy will be short by at least 10,000 recruits each, and the Air Force will fall short on recruits for just the 3rd time in its history. The foundation of the all-volunteer force is a steady supply of young men and women willing to serve their country in uniform. Without that foundation, the all-volunteer force becomes top-heavy and less effective. I expect the Assistant Secretary to be a leader in fixing this problem. I'm concerned the Department of Defense is increasingly becoming an instrument of controversial social policies. Most of these policies are influenced by the office Mr. Cohane hopes to lead. I believe this administration is exacerbating the recruiting challenge by prioritizing these policies. A large number of Americans do not want to join an organization led by people who are often more interested in fighting culture wars than preparing for actual wars. And I was very interested in the chair's comments just a few moments ago about making sure that we're not creating policies based on unfounded accusations. As someone who joined the United States military half a century ago as a young college student and who served on both active duty and in the reserve, I have long ago come to the conclusion that the United States military is the greatest civil rights organization and the greatest equal opportunity program in the history of the world. I believe that has been the case for decades and decades and continues to be so. And so I do wonder about the unfounded accusations that seem to be driving policy. So I'm interested in what Mr. Cohane might do, if confirmed, to restore the Department's focus on its mission, which is to provide military forces needed to deter war and ensure our nation's security. That's the mission that makes people so enthusiastic about joining our armed services. Now, Mr. Girton has been nominated by the President to be Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. And he seems to be singularly qualified for this important position. He will be responsible for managing the development of weapons for the Navy and Marine Corps. During this hearing, I hope to learn how the Navy can bring the latest technology to our warfighters and make sure the systems they currently have are ready to deploy. I'm concerned the Department of Defense is not moving fast enough to create a credible deterrent within the next 5 years as the threat from China increases, and I'm sure Mr. Girton shares that concern. Perhaps we'll explore that during questions. The committee has provided means for the Navy to move faster in acquisition, but they're not taking full advantage of those means. Instead, the Navy relies on cautious, slow methods that delay the delivery of critical assets. By attempting to eliminate risk to acquisition officials, the Navy increases risk on the battlefield. And I think that can be said service-wide, not just for the Navy. We must innovate. It's time to make the most of existing acquisition authorities so our speed matches or exceeds that of our adversaries. And Mr. Girton will be, in this new capacity, in a position to help us achieve a quantum leap in this regard. I'm interested in what Mr. Girton will do, if confirmed, to change the culture of acquisition workforce to start accepting measured risks and deliver capabilities at the scale and pace that our national defense strategy requires. I thank our witnesses, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wicker, very much. Gentlemen, before I recognize you, there are a series of questions that are asked of all civilian nominees. You may reply in unison. Have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
Yes.
Have you assumed any duties or taken any actions that would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
No. No.
Exercising our legislative and oversight responsibilities makes it important that this committee, its subcommittees, and other appropriate committees of Congress receive testimony, briefings, reports, records, and other information from the executive branch on a timely basis. Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify before this committee when requested?
Yes. Yes.
Do you agree to provide records, documents, and electronic communications in a timely manner when requested by this committee, its subcommittees, or other appropriate committees of Congress, and to consult with the requester regarding the basis of any good faith delay or denial in providing such records?
Yes. Yes.
Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established by this committee for the production of reports, records, and other information, including timely responding to hearing questions for the record?
Yes.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes.
Will those witnesses and briefers be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Cohane, please.
Thank you, Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Wicker, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm deeply honored to come before you today as President Biden's nominee for Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. I'm grateful to President Biden, Secretary Austin, Deputy Secretary Hicks, and Undersecretary Cisneros for their trust and confidence in me. I want to start with thanking my family, friends, and mentors for their encouragement and support that has brought me to this place and time. While my mother is unable to be here in person today, she and my brothers understand the great importance of this moment and are certainly cheering me on from afar. And lastly, to my father, who undoubtedly is watching down proudly on these proceedings. Coming from a family of educators, my parents instilled the values of hard work, empathy, and public service in my siblings and me, which has served as my North Star and given me the passion and commitment to serve our service members, their families, and our career public servants. I have very vivid memories as a small child loading up in the family station wagon as we would drive my father to our local armory as he headed off to Fort Drum for his annual training. Equally so, I recall the official military photos of my uncles that sat in a place of prominence on our living room mantle as they served in Vietnam. All a constant reminder of the important sacrifice our service members and their families make for all of us each and every day. I've spent the vast majority of my 30-year career in support of our service members and their families. My first job out of college was as a young Schedule C appointee in the Department of Defense during the Clinton administration. It was at that time I discovered my passion for working with and for our service members and their families. Throughout my career, I've worked in support of a wide variety of human capital-focused efforts to include transition assistance, sexual assault response and prevention, mental health counseling, and support of our wounded, ill, and injured population among others. Under the Obama administration, I had the honor and privilege to serve as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Military, Community, and Family Policy, where I was able to further play an important role in a wide array of programs supporting our service members and families. Secretary Austin has laid out clear priorities, reaffirming that the men and women of our armed forces are our most valuable asset. I sit here before you today with the full understanding that, if confirmed, I will be charged with addressing some of the most important policy decisions in the department, a responsibility I do not take lightly. If confirmed for this position, I will pay special focus on a number of major challenges, including recruiting and propensity to serve, as well as several issues impacting retention, including compensation, spouse employment, and access to affordable child care for our military and our career public servant families. I have deep appreciation for the hard work this committee has done on behalf of our service members and their families and our civilian workforce. If confirmed, I commit to seeking the advice and counsel of this committee and your staffs regularly to advance our nation's priorities on these most important issues. Thank you for your consideration. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Thank you very much. Mr. Girton, please. Or Director Girton, I should say.
Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Wicker, and distinguished
Could you
members-
bring that microphone as close as possible, please?
Thank you. Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Wicker, and distinguished members of the committee, it's a privilege to be here today. I'm honored to be before you as the President's nominee to serve as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. And I would like to thank President Biden, Secretary Austin, and Secretary Del Toro for their confidence in nominating me. I would also like to thank my family, who you see behind me, Maria, my loving wife of 21 years, our children, Enrico and Isabella. And please let me recognize my mother and the rest of my family, including my brother Pierre and cousin Greg, who are also here today. Lastly, I would like to thank the many great mentors and teammates across government, industry, and academia that have helped me to learn and grow throughout my career. I'm especially grateful to this committee to have afforded me the best job I've ever had, my current role as the Director for Operational Test and Evaluation, and to be in a position, if confirmed, to take on the greatest job I've ever dreamt of, to be the Naval Acquisition Executive. Just as I've enjoyed in my time as DOT&E, I look forward to having an open, frank, and honest conversation with you about how to transform the way the Navy and Marine Corps acquires and sustains our seagoing capabilities. I take this renewed commitment to continue to serve our nation both very seriously and with great enthusiasm. It has been about a year and a half since I last introduced myself to you, but please indulge me a moment for a short recap. I spent the past 4 years working on developing, testing, fielding, researching, and improving the acquisition of military systems. I started my career as an enlisted nuclear power plant operator on submarines. Having completed active duty service, immediately transitioned to the Navy Reserves while attending college, and after graduating, landing a job as a naval civilian engineer. The citizen-sailor pairing would serve me well for the following decades to keep me grounded in what it took to do operations, maintenance, and testing in the fleet while also developing new systems. There is much vital work to do on behalf of the Navy and Marine Corps team. It is not lost on me the enormous challenge ahead. As I look across the department, I see an aging force in need of modernization. I see existing industrial-based challenges exacerbated by and still recovering from the pandemic. And I see a need to innovate solutions to affordably develop and field systems that provide our sailors and Marines an advantage in any conflict. Accordingly, I believe that we need to think and act differently in order to field naval capabilities that protect and enable our nation's strategic interests and economic prosperity. I made a career centered around acting thoughtfully to change the way we field excellence in warfighting systems. I've had an impact on the methods, outcomes, and spanning the acquisition of testing of naval capabilities for ships, submarines, aircraft, ground vehicles, and the weapon systems that go in them. I'm committed to fulfilling the duties of this office to lead a great team dedicated to designing and building excellence that works and can be delivered and maintained in the quantities needed for the naval force to be effective well into the future. As a part of that, I intend on collecting their intellect and enthusiasm to accelerate and streamline the delivery of innovation needed to provide unparalleled warfighting advantage at scale. Our enduring requirement must be to foster and embrace change, and in doing so, create mission systems that are also built to change over time. As Secretary Del Toro recently stated, we must empower our Navy and Marine Corps acquisition professionals to aggressively develop promising technologies into capabilities warfighter needs to maintain maritime dominance. If confirmed, it is my objective to live up to that charge and provide for the best trained, best equipped, and most capable naval force in the world. It would be an honor to contribute to that mission and to serve as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Girton. And gentlemen, thank you both for your testimony. Mr. Cohane, as I mentioned in my statement, the Army has an interesting pilot program, the Future Soldier Prep Course, which takes recruits who may not do well on the test or the physical aspects of the process and puts them in a pilot program, develops them, and then if they do make those tests, enlist them in the military. And we also know anecdotally from some recruiters that there are some very talented individuals, particularly first-generation Americans, who may not be as good a tester, but they would be excellent soldiers. So do we have to think about the standardized test? Should we reconsider their use? Maybe it should be just one tool, not the tool. Your comments?
Senator, I completely agree. I think at this point, everything should be on the table. I think we're at the point in which we need to consider all new approaches. We want to make sure that we are not lowering our standards, yet being able to provide an opportunity for anyone who wants to serve and is eligible to serve, meets the stringent requirements, has that opportunity. If confirmed for this position, Senator, I would work with my team and the services and indeed this committee on resolving that issue immediately.
Thank you. We spend a lot of money on advertising. I don't have a feeling that we really understand it as well as some other large enterprises, nor do we track it as well. Is that something that would be of interest and concern to you?
Yes, sir. I think it's on the top of my list. Just personally, I think we need to really look at doing things differently. I think technology has not been embraced necessarily in that particular recruiting environment. We need to readjust, perhaps really engage heavy with some of the technology. If it means coming back to this committee for additional guidance and approvals and authorizations, we need to be prepared to do that.
Okay. And then again, we're fighting a difficult battle because the demographics of the country continually reduce the pool of eligible individuals. So every year you're looking at essentially a smaller potential group of enlistees, and we have to recognize that, and we have to try means to enlarge that pool, and I hope you can do that or will do that.
Yes, sir. My previous boss used to always refer to us as saying we need to fish in different ponds, and I think we need to do that. Our traditional use along the department to recruit amongst the same similar southern states, we need to adjust that. We need to look and make sure we're representing the entire country.
Thank you very much. Director Girton, as you know, we're having a problem building ships on time, and within budget, we're also having significant difficulties in maintaining ships. With only a few exceptions, nuclear-powered submarines are maintained by the 4 Navy shipyards at Portsmouth, Norfolk, Puget Sound, and Pearl Harbor. And then we have private shipyards that deal with most of our surface craft. But the Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Program, SIOP, which I mentioned, it's a 20-year, $21 billion effort. It's absolutely critical. We need it. In fact, we don't have 20 years. We've got to move very, very quickly. The poster child for this whole issue is the USS Boise that's been tied up since, I think, 2017, waiting for maintenance, denying us a nuclear-powered submarine or attack submarine in the fleet. So do you have ideas what we can do to expand our capacity quickly?
Senator, this is a topic of immense interest to me. Having worked at several of those shipyards you mentioned and having a strong connection with the shipbuilding community, I want to make sure that we aggressively pursue any method we can, but one of the biggest problems is the workforce, attracting and retaining skilled tradescrafts and engineers that we need in order to get them out to the waterfront so we can build these ships and maintain them on time. Our ships don't do us a lot of good in port and dry docks. They need to be able to respond to the nation's needs. And it is my commitment to make sure that that is aggressively pursued and improved.
One of the ironies here is you're competing against Mr. Cohen. And I don't think that should be lost upon us, because we're looking for essentially the same dedicated, motivated, skilled young man or woman to go into the shipyards as we are to go into the service. So we have to do that. But I can't emphasize enough the criticality of accelerating and expanding our shipyards capacity, because it's nice to have a number of X number of ships, but when only a fraction of them can go to sea, we're fooling ourselves. Thank you very, very much, gentlemen. Senator Wicker, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Girton, you said in your statement, I believe we need to think and act differently in order to fill the naval capabilities that protect and enable our nation's strategic interests and economic prosperity. So talk to us about how we need to act differently, and be as specific as you can. Also, I mentioned in my statement that this committee, through statute, had provided certain authorities that, in my judgment, have not been fully acted on. Would you comment on that, and do you need additional authorities to become more flexible and nimble?
Thank you, Senator. An excellent question. It goes right to the core of why I think I can make a big positive difference for the Navy and Marine Corps. Some of the more specific things you asked about, or you asked me to comment on, was, what exactly does that mean? What does that look like? We live in a world now where almost everything is software defined or controlled, or even the way we build purely physical things is done through tools and modeling and numerical analysis done in computers. We need to embrace those digital tools used to make these systems. Model-based engineering is a critical element of making sure we can build these things faster. And then also to do some of the things I've been doing in my current role in operational test and evaluation. How do we test them using computers to test things more in an automated fashion, using digital twins and other tools of that kind? There's powerful opportunities to take advantage, and we need to make sure we bring those into how we do that technology development so we can rapidly field capabilities that work and can also be built to scale. Some of the new authorities Congress has afforded us, things like middle tier of acquisition, rapid prototyping, reaching out to non-traditional businesses, those are all on the table, and I'm excited about taking advantage of those authorities in order to improve the pace of delivering capability to the fleet.
Well, am I anywhere close in saying that the Navy hasn't fully taken advantage of those authorities this committee has provided?
Senator, I don't have the details on every single program as yet, but I'd be happy to give you a more detailed answers. I get deeper into it. And
okay, we'll do that. And also, if you need further authorities, we mark up a bill and pass it every year, and we have a history of doing that for decade and after decade. And we have a vehicle available to you in that regard. Mr. Cohen, the chairman mentioned in his statement basing policies on unfounded allegations, which were not helpful. And I guess I came back even a little stronger in reemphasizing that. So I want to ask you about that. There has been there's been an effort to say that there was extremism that needed to be rooted out. We had an extremism stand-down day. And as far as as I can tell, it turned out that after an extensive study and thousands and thousands of man-hours, there were only about 100 examples in our entire military system with all the services. Do you think that stand-down day was a valuable use of man-hours?
Senator, I have limited visibility into the department and how that went at the end of the day. However, I think certainly extremism is an important issue that we always need to and always will be looking at in the department, and making sure that we are educating. The smallest type of extremism can certainly be problematic.
Do you think it's helpful, though, in, when we're trying to get young Americans from all demographics and all economic groups to do as the chairman and I did decades ago and sign up to defend their country? Do you think it's helpful to send a message that there is a need for extremism stand-down day?
Well, Senator, again, I'm not familiar with how the whole day went. However, I do believe we need to start our recruiting earlier and making sure that we do citizenship type of activities and have folks focus a little bit more on becoming good citizens before they get to a point of extremism issues.
Okay, well, and I acknowledge that this is not a program that you came up with. Let me just say, Mr. Chairman, and my time has expired. There is a lot of talk about equity. And it's come to mean in the regard of this administration, equal outcome rather than equal opportunity. I'm concerned about that, and perhaps on the record you might comment. As a matter of fact, I would ask you to comment on your views about that issue as you prepare to take on this responsibility. And I'll just let you do that on the record.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator. Senator Hirono, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohane, is that how your name is pronounced?
Cohane.
Cohane,
ma'am.
because it looks distinctly Hawaiian to me.
I get that often.
You get that a lot, don't
I
you?
get that a
Because
lot,
in
yes.
Hawaii we would say Kyohane.
She means that as a compliment.
And I take it as a compliment.
Yes, Cohane. So welcome to both of you. To ensure the fitness of nominees to serve, I ask the following two questions of all nominees who come before any of the 5 committees on which I sit, and these are foundational questions, so I will ask you both. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No,
No, Senator.
no, Senator.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No.
No. No.
Mr. Gurdon, as you noted in your responses, the Navy's infrastructure has suffered from chronic underinvestment, and the repercussions are crises like the one communities in Hawaii are facing regarding Red Hill, reduced naval maintenance capacity for our force, and untenable living situations for our service members and their families. So the need to repair our basic facilities is urgent. In your prospective position, you will be responsible for sustainment matters for the Navy. Mr. Gurdon, what's the impact of underfunding the maintenance of the Navy's infrastructure on the sustainable costs and times?
Senator,
Sustainment costs and times.
thank you, Senator. So if we don't take care of how we make our systems to fix our systems, then they're less able to do that work effectively. That comes under the general context of technical debt. And it's something we always have to keep our eye on, but unfortunately it appears that we've let our eye off the ball in that area. The reason we've got now these new programs like PSYOP and other efforts that are going on there in Hawaii to improve that infrastructure so we can do a better job of taking care of the people that are going to do this work.
So these are entrenched problems, and one would hope that there would be some funding to address these, or to fix rather these, the crumbling infrastructure that's, I would say, very persistent in all of our services. So what would you, are you advocating for, should you get the position, would you advocate for more money for the infrastructure needs of our services, or particularly the Navy?
Senator, it is absolutely my intent to go and visit these different shipyards and these activities, and see for myself what their conditions are, and talk to the teams that are working on these programs like PSYOP, and find out if they are appropriately funded and if we need to come back and talk to Congress about getting additional resources if required.
Well, PSYOP, thankfully, it is a 20-year program, and we have to make sure that we continue to fund the modernization et cetera, of our shipyards. But for example, Red Hill had very little to do with our shipyards, and yet these were, this is infrastructure built in World War II. So my hope is that the Navy and indeed our entire military will assess the infrastructure needs to make sure that our pipes are not bursting, our electrical systems are in place, and I would look for you to do that for the Navy. Mr. Cohen, in your prospective role as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, it will be imperative for you to examine all ways to improve the quality of life for our service members and boost retention and recruitment. Both of you have talked about that. A top reason service members leave the force, particularly women, are the additional challenges a life of uniformed service has on family planning. If confirmed, what would you do to address recruitment and retention concerns across the force? And I'd like you to respond to cryptopreservation as a fertility tool for service members which they could use if they wish to have children in the future. And that certainly, I would say, that could add to the retention and recruitment arguments for our military. So can would you support cryovision, which, by the way, the British Armed Forces provides to their members?
Excuse me, Senator, I truly believe that providing quality health care to all of our service members is certainly critical and important. I believe that we need to have everything on the table and look at every option. I would certainly be happy to look at that and learn certainly a lot more about it, but I do believe that that does and will impact our recruiting ability with women.
Yes, and I would ask you to familiarize yourself with what the British
Yes, ma'am.
Armed Services does, and they provide this kind of option for women and men in their services. I will submit some other questions for the record, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Reynolds. Senator Mullen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohen, you said at the beginning in your statement that you want to keep everyone and allow anyone that wants to serve to serve. Is that correct?
That meets our stringent standards, yes, sir.
Underneath the vaccine mandate that was installed August 24th, 2021, as of November 30, 2022, DOD had discharged 8,123 service members based on the vaccine status. Naval personnel separated based on vaccine status was awarded an honorable discharge. However, 93.5% of our airmen, 85.8% of our soldiers, 94.1% of our Marines were given a general discharge, denying them the GI Bill eligibility. This obviously, because the FY23 NDAA, the vaccine mandate was rescinded. Would you consider allowing these individuals, one, to come back and serve, and two, if not, at least upgrading them to an honorable discharge?
Thank you, Senator. I do understand each of the services does have a process for adjudicating any of these claims. If confirmed, I would certainly encourage any member to petition their individual board to do so.
Would you advocate on their behalf?
I would advocate on their behalf, sir.
To bring them back into the service?
I would look at all that. I need to become smarter in how the services have adjudicated those individual cases, and I'd be willing to do so.
What do you mean by smarter by it? I mean, it's pretty clear here. I'm not trying to be combatant. I'm just trying to say, I'm trying to follow that, clarify what you're saying.
I understand each of the services adjudicated these cases based on their own policies and procedures. I need to get a little smarter, certainly, on how they came to that fruition at the end of the day. But we'd be certainly, if confirmed, work with the services and your office as well to understand better what those cases were and why they are different from one another.
But would you support bringing them back into the service?
If they are eligible, if they are eligible by the standards that we have set forth, the services have set forth, I would.
Okay. Another question for you. In 2018, 30.5% of service members reported being sexually harassed and 7% reported being sexually assaulted. Have the regulations passed in the wake of the murder of Vanessa Guillen had an impact on how you would continue prevention work?
Well, Senator, that topic falls under a different office within the PNR portfolio. However, I acknowledge we would work certainly closely together.
Well, it does play a factor in service members signing up. As a father of 3 beautiful young ladies, who I would encourage all 6 of my kids to serve, it is a concern of mine when you hear 30.5% of the service members in 2018 had been sexually harassed or 7% sexually assaulted. That's a huge issue. And for you, talking about the workforce, this is a big issue and a big challenge moving forward. Yes. Vanessa Guillen's murder obviously brought that to the forefront. And we worked hard on making sure we made some changes in the bill with the Vanessa Guillen bill, and ultimately it changed moving forward. But I believe this is something that you would have to, it would fall in your lap.
Yes, sir. I'm sure we would work with my colleagues on this. Bottom line, this is unacceptable, and it is offensive that these are happening. I know Secretary Austin has issued recent guidance on a number of steps with the military academies, but this issue is certainly very upsetting, and we certainly need to address it. If confirmed, I'll address it immediately with my counterparts.
Thank you. Last question. Has either one of you reached out to the, I know you guys went through this process last year, but has either one of you all reached out to the new senators to set up a meeting with anyone or a phone call on your all's behalf?
Senator, the Legislative Affairs team does that reach out to the senators? My understanding is they reached out to all members of this committee.
Did they reach out to your office?
You go ahead and check on that.
I checked before I got here, and no one had reached out to us. And that's an issue, because if you're wanting our support, it would be beneficial to probably reach out to us, because I had this kind of unwritten rule in my office. I'm not voting for someone that didn't take the time to come meet with me, because I want to know who I'm voting for. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Mullen. Senator Kane, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the witnesses, thank you for your service. I want to ask Director Gerten a question. You and I talked about this a bit already. Last year, we had in the committee a lot of backing and forthing over amphibs. And when we had the Navy posture hearing, and I think it was at the end of April, there had been some churn and a suggestion that the Navy and the Marine Corps and maybe the SecDef or the White House was not on the same page with respect to amphib requirements that the Marines would need. At the posture hearing, Admiral Gilday, Secretary Del Toro, Commandant Berger said, we're on the same page. You're not going to see us diverge. You're going to get a report from us soon that will validate the requirements. That was in April. We got the report in late December, and I thought it was going to be like War and Peace size, because it had taken so long to get it to us, and it was 4 pages long. It did say that there's a need for 31, which is congressionally directed, so that was good, and it had everybody kind of signed on. But I was surprised that it took so long, and that the analysis, at least what we were given, was so cursory. The President submitted to us his budget last week, and the budget includes only one LHA, no plan to build an LPD in the fit-up. So setting aside that budget, you're not responsible for that budget, but if you're confirmed, how will you approach assessment of the congressionally directed requirements for 31 amphibious ships?
So, Senator, it's not lost on me that this controversy about numbers of ships has been exacerbated even earlier this week, with OSD weighing in on, how many ships are going to be in the budget and what in that matter. But for my efforts, working directly with the Chief of Naval Operations and the Commandant of the Marine Corps to make sure we have validated requirements and have those, pushed through the budget process, to make sure we get the right numbers of ships that meet the needs of the national security strategy. I'm perplexed that this has been so controversial, but I'm committed to working on that and getting to the root of it, making sure we're building the right numbers of ships that meet the requirements of the national security strategy.
I'd look forward to working with you on that, and I know other members of the committee feel the same way. Mr. Cohen, I appreciated our visit yesterday, and one of the things we talked about was mental health care, suicide prevention. We've had a string of really challenging instances in Hampton Roads, sailors connected to the George Washington, which has been under a very long refurb, multiple suicides in that portion of the fleet, and then a number of sailors who had been assigned limited duty status at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Maintenance Center on the Norfolk Naval Base also died by suicide, 4 within about a 45-day period. That one caused a light bulb to go off in my head that it should have probably gone off before. If somebody is in the Navy and they have an MOS and they really are trained to do this thing, but then they're not doing that job because their ship's in a seemingly endless refurb, or because of something, it might be a broken bone or a pregnancy, they're assigned into a limited duty status, and it's unclear exactly when that status will end. Will they go back to the fleet? Will they receive a med board and exit the military? Periods where people aren't doing the thing they train for can lead to some sort of hopelessness or confusion or what's my place, and then that can exacerbate other issues and lead to significant mental health challenges. Should you be confirmed, talk to me a little bit about what you want to do to have appropriate mental health services available for all of our military members and their families, but particularly maybe some of those who are in a limited duty status or in another status where they're not necessarily doing what they thought they were going to be doing.
Thank you, Senator. So within the department and under the umbrella of the MNRA shop, there is the Military and Family Life Counselor Program. It is the largest mental health counseling program in the department, 2,600 people worldwide. The great part of that particular process is an individual can go seek counseling on any number of issues without having any PII collected on them. So it frees up that level of burden on an individual. I think if confirmed, I would work with the team to promote that better within the departments, within the services out in the field, so people are more aware of that. Additionally, I think this is a great opportunity where the family programs can step in and offer external or highlight other MWR programs, things like that, that would also get some of these service members out and about, out of their box, thinking a little bit differently.
I appreciate that. I'd look forward to working with you on it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Budd, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, gentlemen. Director Gerten, assuming for a moment that China intends to invade Taiwan in 2027, this may be the last year to initiate buys on critical capabilities that could make the difference in deterring or denying an amphibious assault across the Taiwan Strait. So where do you think the Navy can and should assume risk in its acquisition process to field these systems more rapidly? Or are there ways to move faster while still buying down the risk?
Senator, I'm a particularly big fan of using some of the things I've been successful with in projects that I've worked on and led in the past, things like open architectures and using modularity to focus the efforts necessary for delivering capability and making sure it works excellently, and then integrating it into other things that are also used. And as we do that more and more throughout the force and fleet, we'll be able to upgrade and improve those systems as more of a matter of course instead of something that's extraordinarily different. So using those kinds of engineering tools in order to put those capabilities out where they can be as quickly as possible is something I'm particularly interested in.
Yeah, thank you for that. The Navy's making, and continue on with you, the Navy is making historic investments in munitions in the industrial base, but we're still overly reliant on single production lines for some of the most critical capabilities. And there's a lot of risk in that. So if confirmed, what will you do to increase the capacity and resilience across our industrial base?
So, Senator, that's another great topic of mine. Thank you for both of these questions. One of the things that I want to make sure we do more effectively is to use competition to improve outcomes, and also to be able to produce things with different vendors. The best way to do that is to more rigorously apply the government's rules on intellectual property, so we could share the necessary pieces while preserving industry's ability to innovate and secure their golden tickets, if you will, but also to use the information coming out of where the government has invested its money so we can get more vendors into the game of building munitions specifically.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Cohen, Fort Bragg currently has a waiting list of more than 800 families for child care. We need more child development centers. We know that, but they take time to build. So if confirmed, what would you do in the short term to reduce the strain on military families?
Thank you, Senator. That certainly, I can tell you, is an issue dear to my heart as a small business owner that plays just as importantly. I think the department has been doing a good job of late, and I would expand upon this. They've tried to think outside the box with childcare, not lowering the standards that we expect of our child care centers, but working with the states, either spending money, giving money to the states to work with their, to work with the facilities within the state to meet our standards. I also think that there are other issues such as emergency backup care that could also play an important role for some of our military families, especially while PCSing or exceptional family members. So there are a number of things that I would look forward to working on if confirmed.
We appreciate that and look forward to your effort in that.
Senator Rosen, please.
Well, thank you, Chairman Reed. I appreciate you having this hearing. I want to thank the nominees for testifying today and for your willingness to serve. And so I want to talk about child care too in a minute, but first I want to talk about commuting assistance for service members. So, Mr. Cohane, I'd like to ask about a problem facing airmen stationed at Creech Air Force Base. And miles from Las Vegas, which is about 45 miles away. Sometimes at Nellis Air Force.
On this issue, I think it's an important issue. I think it is one that probably doesn't get a lot of attention because a lot of our facilities are located in remote areas and environment with high inflation and costs for our service members and their families. I'm not familiar with the details. To be honest with you, I don't think I can give you an answer that you would deserve. But if confirmed, I would absolutely get back to you.
Well, thank you, and I want to build on what Senator Budd was talking about, because not only are the commuting costs and availability of a further away from an urban area. But childcare, accessibility, and affordability, really important. So last week, Senator Ernst and I reintroduced our Small Business Child Care Investment Act. This is bipartisan legislation that would increase the availability of affordable, high-quality child care to families by allowing nonprofits, those nonprofit child care providers, to qualify as small businesses in all the programs that would be available. And so, as you're aware, we said, as was mentioned, it's really an acute challenge for our service members to access affordable and high quality loan eligibility, other kinds of creative solutions. We want to ease the burden for in their housing and in their child care. Do you have any other suggestions that you might like to share with us today?
Senator, I think you're absolutely right. Those are priorities. We need to focus heavily on those. If confirmed, I will do so. Again, I think the department has done well the last few years trying to think outside the box. Most importantly, not lowering the standards of our expectations for taking care of our military families and child care. But certainly look forward to working with yourself and the services as well and outside entities to try to brainstorm what makes the most sense, especially post-COVID. I think we really need to understand better, perhaps, the voices of the military families and what they need in this environment.
Well, I think this all helps with recruitment and retention of our quality people and their quality of their ability to serve our nation and protect us. So really important. I'd like to move with the time, a little bit time I have left, over to the submarine industrial base capacity. and workforce needs. So, Mr. Guertin, I'll turn it over to you. This week, the President announced that Australia is expected to purchase at least 3, possibly up to 5 Virginia-class submarines in the 2030s. This deal would deepen the AUKUS Pact, a landmark defense agreement between the U.S., Australia, and the UK, United Kingdom. In addition, this deal sends a healthy demand signal to our suppliers all along the submarine industrial base. So construction of Virginia and Columbia-class submarines is operating under a schedule dictating that 2 Virginia-class submarines must be delivered per year through 2033, and 1 Columbia-class submarine must be delivered per year beginning in 2026. Does the U.S. currently have the industrial capacity, the skilled workforce to keep up with this demand and these deadlines, especially in light of this new agreement? And if you're confirmed, how will you address the workforce and capacity issue that we might be facing?
One of the things that I want to make confirm to this position of our timeliness. My understanding is that we have most of the industrial capacity to keep up with the laydown, but we're really struggling in the workforce area. As we discussed earlier, want to make sure that we're getting these skilled trades, new people coming into the workforce and learning, or young people that I want to make sure they can find kinds of ships that we need so very much.
Thank you very much. I can tell you every single committee I'm on, every time I testify or hear from a witness, it's always about the workforce people pipeline, no different here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Guertin, I want to follow up on some of the questions that you've had about industrial base. It seems to me that's one of the lessons we have from Ukraine, is maintaining the industrial base and being sure that there are consistent demand signals that will allow to make the investments necessary to take from Ukraine.
So, Senator, first of all, watching what's happening in Ukraine is a tragedy, and the rigor and fight that's amazing is how fast they're burning through munitions. And if we are forced into an opportunity where we have to deny an adversary something we want to be a part of, we're going to have deep bunkers. And in order to do that, we're going to have to really ramp up, to position themselves so they could build more affordably and at scale.
Your procurements, it seems to me, is one way to send that demand signal. Do you agree?
Absolutely. My current colleague, Dr. LaPlante, Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, he's been doing some excellent work in this area to take advantage of some of the authorities that Congress has provided in order to get those longer-term deals established.
One of the issues that I'm concerned about particularly is the transition from the DDG-class destroyer to whatever the new surface combatant is, to be sure that there's not a trough, if you will, of demand, which would cause us to lose skilled personnel, and you can't, it's very difficult in this economy to get them back. So management of that, so that there's not a gap between the constructions of...
It's likely to be with the government, with the Navy. Understanding of what that design...
My vision is a 3D printer on every ship. We are a pipe, whatever. So as part of the procurement process, we should be buying the our own capacity programs.
Senator, that's a particular interest of mine, is better have contracts with industry, and my commitment to you is to more aggressively utilize those rights, and where those rights don't get us the information just naturally as a part of the business deal, where we need to purchase additional intellectual property, where it's something that's related to unique investments that industry might do, that we can have a reasonable discussion with industry about how that is in their best interest, sure that their equipment is managed, maintained effectively over time.
Thank you. Mr. Cohen, one of the issues I've been meeting with a lot of veterans lately, and one of the issues in personnel is the transition out of the military. We have the TAP program, but the consensus I'm getting is that there are gaps, there are problems with it, and the suggestion is that the Pentagon should spend as much time and money and effort on transition out as they do on recruitment in. I hope you'll focus on that issue, because the disproportionate number of veteran suicide take place in the first 2 or 3 years after separation, and things like notifying the state veteran services that somebody's coming so they can be literally met at the airport. I hope that's something you'll pay attention to.
Yes, sir. Transition assistance and those programs have been something I've paid attention to for years, been very passionate about. I certainly think they've gotten a little bit better, but we need to do a far better job. I think that trying to bridge that educational process earlier in than waiting till the last few months of someone's time within the service is certainly helpful. When they return home, perhaps they should be required to go to their local armory and pick up their final paperwork. Do a soft handoff when appropriate. I think we need to start thinking a little bit different based on how the world really is today. And if confirmed, I look forward to working with the team and certainly you and your staff as well, Senator, to work on this issue.
Thank you. I think this is very important, and I
agree.
I commend your attention to it, and we'll look forward to following up with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Blumenthal, please.
Thank you. Thank you both for your service, and welcome to your new jobs. I think you'll have overwhelming support for these positions, and you certainly have mine. Mr. Gorton, thanks to your Connecticut family. Hope you will visit Groton, and we can combine that visit with one to East Haddam, where your sister is a teacher. Public service runs in your family, and thank you for your service in the Navy as well as now in the Department of Defense. And you've answered many of my questions already, so I'm not going to repeat them. But I would like to just focus for a moment on, number one, the industrial base, the need to train the workforce. I'm very glad that you are committed to that challenge and meeting that challenge. And second, in terms of getting the Virginia-class submarine production back on track, making sure that we do build 2 submarines a year. We're a bit late on that timetable. I've raised with you the indemnification issue. The Navy has reversed 40 years of precedence. I know you're not responsible for it, but it refuses to provide for and award those already negotiated Block 5 ships in terms of indemnification. And I believe that the delay is on the Navy's shoulders. I think that there has to be a resolution to this indemnification issue. And just want to ask you, if you're confirmed, will you commit to getting those Block 5 submarines under contract expeditiously? And will you commit to working with the industry to find a mutually acceptable path toward resolving that indemnification issue?
Yes, Senator, you have my commitment on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Cotton, please.
Mr. Cohen, I know you've already addressed the recruiting crisis a lot this morning. I just want to register my concerns about it as well. We missed our goals last year by almost 15,000 in the Army, and the other services also struggled in various ways of shifting around manpower, so they look like they hit theirs. I don't think there's any signs that this year's going to be better. I worry that the recruiting crisis is soon going to become a retention crisis in the years ahead, as you don't have a pipeline of young soldiers to replace junior NCOs, and more and more is demanded of them. Can you give me your thoughts on what the key causes for this crisis is?
Thank you, Senator. I think there's probably a number of them. Certainly the last handful of years, our military has not been able to get out and be present with a lot of communities, with our youth, with our teachers, with our coaches, a lot of those typical areas that we would normally build that relationship. I also think that there have been a number of challenges, even with BRAC and others, where we have deserts of places within the country that we don't have a military presence, which exacerbates the whole problem in general. I do think when it comes to the marketing and so forth that has been done traditionally, we need to do a better job. The department needs to do a better job and utilize technology and think a different way of reaching out to the youth of today, deal with things certainly much differently than I did when I was their age.
What role do you think advertising and marketing plays in this? The Army has just debuted a new set of ads harkening back to its 1980s Be-All-You-Can-Be ads. What role can different marketing strategies play in trying to recruit more young men and women into the military?
Sure, and I think in this instance, Senator, one of the best things to do is also look at the private sector and how they are marketing to their potential new employees and so forth. I think there's a technology aspect that we probably don't use, the department doesn't use well enough, and that is either, let's say somebody has been clicking on a number of photos of a submarine. Does the department capture, our marketing process capture those individuals' statistics and be able to push the right marketing materials to them, get them interested, see if they are interested? I understand fully that that might require some additional approvals from Congress to make sure that we are staying within the confines of appropriate handling of information, but technology is out there that we need to look at.
Okay. We hear a lot, especially from senior uniformed leaders, about the low percentage of young Americans who are actually eligible to serve in our military. Do you know what percentage that is? What percentage of young Americans are eligible to serve?
Senator, off the top of my head, I think it's fairly low, probably in the 20s.
Yeah, I think that's right, or maybe even the teens. I have to say, I think that's too low. I mean, do you think that's too low?
You know, I think, you know, on the macro level, it could be right. I haven't really looked into it, but I know it is. Sadly, it's low. It's too low.
I mean, all of our recruits over time should be honored and celebrated. Maybe my favorite recruits of all time are the teenage boys in World War I and World War II who lied about their age so they could enlist and get a shot at the title overseas, and that we should be encouraging as much as we can every young American to join and to be eligible. And I think most of us have probably had experiences of deep frustration with the military services throwing up roadblocks. You know, a young man who was a top-tier college athlete and had a knee or a hip injury and recovered and continued to be a top-tier college athlete, yet the Army says he's not eligible. Or a kid whose parents got divorced when he was 14 and some doctor prescribed some mood-altering drug for 6 months, and 5 years later he's told it's still disqualifying. I understand, like, we can't have people who are, you know, half blind or fat or flat-footed or what have you in the military. I guess in the second category they can get in shape and join. But I think we should look at ways to try to make more young men and women eligible, especially those who are trying to serve. So can I just get your commitment that you'll look at this tendency that the service has to always, it's almost like a boast, I think, that like only 14% or only 21% are eligible. Again, like it can't be serious felons or people half blind. But we need to do a better job of opening up a bigger pool of recruits, especially when it comes to problems that are temporary or manageable, like old injuries or old psychological diagnoses when kids were, you know, mere adolescents. Even kids that have had some run-ins with the law, you know, nonviolent or juvenile run-ins with the law. I think we need to make the pool bigger so we got a bigger pond to fish in. Can I get your commitment on that?
Absolutely, Senator. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. In fact, let me associate myself with your remarks. I think they're right on target. Thank you. Senator King, please.
I wanted to follow up, Mr. Cohane, on recruitment and retention. We had a very interesting hearing yesterday with General Saltzman, the head of the Space Force, and they're doing something that's unheard of in the military, which is lateral hires. They're bringing people in at a higher level because of the expertise that they need. The other thing they're doing is having a relationship with the reserve, so people can do their private sector job, but then are available when needed, given particular skills. Is that something that could be applied more broadly in order to deal with this recruitment problem?
Senator, I think it's absolutely everything should be on the table. I think that as our military changes, the way in which we fight wars change, we need to have the flexibility. We need to modernize some of our policies so that if you have a certain MOS, perhaps you can move back and forth easily between the reserve and active duty. But we need to make sure that we have everything on the table to understand how we can better pull those folks in based on what the needs and availability are of today.
And following up on Senator Cotton's questions, it may be that the physical requirements aren't as important if you're going to be a cyber warrior.
Yes, sir.
And we need to be thinking about that. On the issue of recruitment, I've seen data recently that it used to be that recruitment and people joining the military were fairly evenly distributed geographically across the country. That's changed dramatically in the last 10 years, where the military has become essentially southern and southwestern. One of the problems in the Northeast is there are no bases anymore, so people don't grow up, young people don't grow up seeing, in my hometown of Brunswick, we don't see people with naval uniforms on anymore, and I think that's a real problem. I hope when in your recruitment efforts you think about this geographic dispersal, concentration actually, which is, I believe, not healthy. We don't want our military to be a regional body. Can you give me some thoughts on this?
Senator, I completely agree. I've heard you speak in the past as well about the unintended consequences of BRAC and exactly what you just described. I think we certainly need to do a better job of making sure that our military is more familiarized to our communities. There's probably a number of ways we can do that, but certainly technology needs to be one of them.
But you can also direct recruitment efforts in certain areas, in Buffalo, New York, or Cleveland, as opposed to Phoenix and Atlanta.
Yes, sir. I think, again, everything should be on the table. We need to really look at this with fresh eyes and figure how we can better reach the population that we need.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Girton, you've been nominated to manage the Navy's acquisition programs. In other words, how the Navy buys things to build and to maintain the fleet. So let's start with something easy. When the military makes a purchase, should it pay whatever the company demands, or should we be using taxpayer money only to buy things where a price is justified by costs and we receive a quality product on time?
Senator, the nature of the contracts for the things that we use to buy this military equipment absolutely should be rigorously applied. You know, we should make sure we're paying for the things we get. There's a variety of different contract types, and they all have their ways of managing cost to make sure that the work is equitable and fair.
Right, but I just want to be sure that we're saying the same thing, that what we're looking for before we agree to pay for anything is that the price is justified by cost and that we have a right to expect on-time performance. Basically right?
Basically right, but Senator, let's make sure we're not talking about, different kinds of animals. There's, fixed price contracting, in which case I completely agree with you. Then when we are there's more technical risk where the outcome is more uncertain, then that may be a better place to put cost-plus contracting, where the cost might not necessarily be
but that's still justified by cost.
Absolutely.
They're just different ways to calculate it. That's all I'm getting at. Because one of the tools that DoD uses to get things made faster is what's called progress payments, and that's where I want to ask more. So rather than pay for a project when it is fully complete, a company that's getting a progress payment gets advanced funding before they've finished building a ship or a plane so that they can cover the large capital investments that they need to make in order to do the job. I understand that. One of the ways that DoD responded to the pandemic was to hike the rate of advance payments to contractors so they got even more upfront. Now, let's be blunt. There was no data to suggest that that was necessary, But I understand that DOD was trying to help workers and the defense industrial base withstand an unprecedented emergency. I get that. But DOD is conducting a study now to determine how to reform progress payments now that the pandemic has eased. So do you agree that if the study shows that increased payments did not help DOD, that we should reevaluate using this method?
Oh, Senator, as you might imagine, my current role, it's all about the data. We want to analyze using data and make sound decisions based on actual information. And so, first of all, I think you're really onto something. I bet there's a pony in there somewhere, but I think we should make sure we have the data that backs it up.
Okay, as long as we will act on those data if the data show the progress payments are not really helping us here. You know, I don't say this very often, but I think the Trump administration had a really smart idea for how to make progress payments work even better. They were sick of programs being behind schedule and over cost, so they proposed tying the size of the progress payment to program performance and then sharing cost and pricing data. Companies that deliver on time and provide all the data would get their money up front. The industry hated President Trump's reform proposal, and they managed to defeat it. But I think it's worth reviving. So let me ask, would you support conditioning or lowering the progress payment rate if it means that ships and airplanes will be cheaper and are more likely to arrive on time?
So, Senator, first and foremost, I'm all about getting the best possible deal for the American people, no question. And I'm also very interested in innovative business models that get us to that end. And that sounds like a great opportunity, and I would love to explore it.
All right. You know, look, failing to conduct proper oversight to control costs hurts our national security, and it hurts our ability to build the force we need to support our national defense strategy. We need to ensure that our acquisition policies are getting a good deal for the military and not just lining the pockets of giant contractors. Let's work together on that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your willingness to serve the nation and the men and women who defend us every day. And I know that's an effort not only of you individually, but your families also. And we look forward to moving with your nominations, and certainly I think you have my support. And with that, I will adjourn this morning's hearing.
Thank you.